Hey guys, it's Dr. May. How are you? How are my favorite YouTubers doing? I hope you guys are okay. I came up with a new topic for us that I want to share with you, and I got some of this information in a book I was reading, and thought, why not? Let's make a video, okay? So here we go. All right, let's get this going. Okay, so this is about managing urges, okay? And I know a lot of us struggle with that, okay? Especially if you're in DBT, if you're working on certain target behaviors, or if you're working on managing an addiction. Urges are a big part of what you're going through, right? So I found a technique that has to do with hot and cold, okay? So I'll call this managing urges with hot and cold in quotes, okay? So I'll explain what all this means. Okay, so let's just define a few things, right? So we're talking about urges, so let's define what the heck we're talking about. So urge, if you look it up, it's basically a strong desire or an impulse, right? So urges move us to do something, right? We really want to do it very badly. We really feel like, let's just do it. And that's the urge, okay? So before the action happens, there's an urge within us that makes us want to act, right? So related, we often talk about cravings. So a craving is a powerful desire for something, okay? And a temptation, another related word, is the desire to do something, especially something wrong or unwise. So that kind of fits in sometimes too, especially if we're talking about target behaviors we're trying to decrease, right? So here's a guy in this picture being tempted by all kinds of different things, right? Monies, cars, cigarettes, food, okay? So what else would people be holding in their hands for you that would be a temptation, right? So these are some common ones that people struggle with, especially if they're in DBT. So food, of course, is a big one, right? And even if you're not in treatment, chances are you crave food at least sometimes, right? Or crave the wrong kinds of food or too much food, right? Substance use or abuse. It could be illicit drugs, such as, the stuff that's in that picture, drugs or alcohol, but it could also be things like cigarettes. It could be caffeine, it could be other kinds of more, lower level substances. Okay. Even sugar, I guess, would fit under there, although that's kind of like a food. Sometimes we get an urge for verbal or physical aggression. Okay. So we want to get more combative with people, and sometimes that gets us in a little bit of trouble, right? Or even self-injury, right? So that's another strong urge that a lot of folks struggle with. Okay. But other things could be in this list as well. It's obviously not an exhaustive list. Okay, so just to get the metaphor clear, right, that we're going to be working with. So imagine that strong urges are hot. Think of like a burning desire to do something, right? So why do we use that word burning? Because we literally heat up in our body when we really feel like we want to do something. Think of someone who's hot-headed, who really wants to act out his anger, right? Whereas on the other hand, a weak urge is considered cold, right? So it's really just kind of just more still, more chilled out, right? Relaxed, right? When you say chilled out, it's a little cooler, right? Okay, so that's kind of the languaging we're going to use here, okay, just to give us an image to work with. Okay, so the question is, how do we make urges hot? Okay, so notice the language I'm using here, make urges, okay? Urges aren't naturally just hot. We actually contribute to how hot or strong or intense they feel, okay? And we don't necessarily do it on purpose, but there are things we could actually look at that can contribute to the strength of an urge, okay? So one is being in the physical presence of the thing that we really want. Okay, so like that little kid is looking at that really yummy looking hamburger, the more you keep looking at it, if it's right in front of you, the more the temptation is going to grow. Okay, so I don't know about you guys, but every once in a while, let's say, at a gathering with some people at a dinner table or something, and in the middle of the table, there's different dishes of stuff, and you're looking at something that looks really tempting, and you ate enough already, but you keep looking at it and looking at it, and eventually you just take some. And then maybe you keep talking and then you look again and you want to take some more, right? Because it's right in front of you. You keep looking at it and it keeps the urge strong, right? Okay, so next thing we do, right, is even if we're not in the presence of it, we build it up in our mind and we imagine it very vividly using our senses, right? And we kind of make it really come alive and really make it emphasize the pleasure of it, emphasize how much we want it and how it's going to make us feel good later, right? Oh, that's going to be so great. Like that guy, imagine yourself like how great you'll feel when you eat that hamburger. Oh man, it'll be so delicious. And the taste of it and the texture and the smell, it smells so good. Like like, the barbecue smell and the ketchup and, oh man, it's so great, right? And you keep building it up in your head and it gets stronger and stronger and you want it more and more and more. Okay. Sound familiar? Okay. And like the granny on the right there, we just focus on how great it's going to make us feel. So so that's another emphasis here. Okay. So another thing we do is we make the urges hot by making the consequences of satisfying the urges cold. Okay, so what does this mean? So let's say I'm talking about eating that burger, okay? So I don't really think about, I'm gonna eat this burger and down the road, if I keep eating burgers all the time, I'm gonna get a heart attack possibly, or some kind of cardiovascular disease because of all the fat and the salt and everything else in it, right? I'm thinking, oh man, that's when I'm gonna be old. I don't even know if that's gonna happen. So the future is uncertain. It could be bad, but maybe it won't be bad. I don't know. So why should I worry about it now, right? So it feels like the consequences don't really matter. So I just kind of like, it's easy to dismiss them, right? And it's not stirring me up emotionally very much, right? Because it feels like so far away, it may not even happen. So it's not scaring me. It's not making me feel like, oh my God, I'm gonna die if I eat too many hamburgers. I'm like, right? So sometimes I just don't care about the consequences. Ever say F it, right? That's kind of the not caring. Like, I don't care what's going to happen. I just want to feel good right now, right? I'm thinking about how great this is going to make me feel. Okay. So that's how we make the consequences cold. Okay. So the main idea is the hotter you make the urge by doing those things, the more likely you are to make it into an action, to act on the urge. Okay. So if you're trying to work on something and not pair your urge with an action, you got to be careful about the way you're making it stronger. Okay. So that's the key. So the stronger you make it, the more likely you're going to act on it. And, it's going to be harder to break that habit. Okay. So what do we do? Okay. So first thing, like with a lot of things, we have to start with mindfulness, right? So we have to be aware of the fact that we have an urge to begin with and that we're contributing to how strong it is by the different ways we're thinking about it. Okay. Both the immediate urge and satisfying it, as well as the consequences down the road. Okay. So then we have to be willing to do something different. So now that I'm aware of what I'm doing, I could keep doing it and satisfy the urge. That's one choice. But another choice could be, all right, now I got to take a different path. Okay, so it takes some willingness and openness to do that. Okay, so how do we make the urges cold, right? To make them less intense. So one, using mindfulness, right, is kind of part of the reasonable mind, as they talk about in DBT, which is more of like our logical mind, thinking about things descriptively, objectively, right? So what if instead of thinking about that hamburger, say, in an emotional way, I just think of it in a very bland, neutral, descriptive way, right? Okay, so there's a bun and there's sesame seeds on it and there's a burger and it looks like it's medium and there's some lettuce and the lettuce is green and the bun is tan and there's stripes on the bun, like, or whatever it is, right? So I'm just like describing it in a neutral way. I'm not going, oh my God, it looks so great, right? So that's an emotional way. That's more emotional mind, okay? So that's one thing we could do, kind of distance ourselves from it by just looking at it in a neutral, descriptive way, okay? Another thing that the book I was talking about suggests is to imagine the object with a picture frame around it, because that makes it seem like less real and a little bit more distant, right? So if I imagine the hamburger in a picture frame hanging on the wall somewhere, or maybe even a black and white picture, or maybe an abstract picture, it doesn't seem as tempting as if I imagine it in 3D real right in front of me, okay? It seems more, neutral, more cold, okay? Another technique is to imagine the object that you're having a desire for way far off in the distance, right? Think of how far you could push it away, right? Like if I imagine that hamburger way, way out in the horizon, super far away, it wouldn't maybe do that much for me, especially if it's so far away I can't even smell it anymore, right? So sometimes it's like a mental trick, just like push it as far away as you can, okay? Sometimes you have to physically do it too, but if it's just an imagination thing, that's another thing you could do. Okay, and also they say to try to view the situation that's creating this tempting situation as a fly on the wall. Okay, so maybe there's something that's triggering your urge. So maybe like I'm feeling kind of emotional and it's making me more susceptible to wanting to medicate my emotions with this hamburger to feel better, right? So what if I distance myself and I just watched myself like a fly on the wall, just sitting there, and I got more perspective on what I'm going through. Maybe I could see it more objectively or see a different option because I'm not in the thick of it, right? So they suggest that as well, okay? It's related a little bit to like mindfulness where you step back and you observe something, right? So it actually gives even more distance because you're not just mentally stepping back, you're physically imagining yourself stepping back, being a fly on the wall, okay? Okay. If it's in front of you, you could hide or push away the object, okay? So if there's a tray of cookies in front of you on a table and there's people, and you're talking with your friends or something like that, maybe just take the tray of cookies and put it in the kitchen so you don't keep looking at it, or put a cover on it so you don't keep staring at the cookies. It makes it a little bit more hidden, right? So if you can't physically escape it completely, or if it's right there, try to hide it or push it away, okay? Another thing is, especially if it's an urge that's in your mind, to use distraction skills. Okay, so in DBT, that would be like the distract with accept skills, and the accepts all stands for something. Each letter stands for a different way that we could distract ourselves, right? So if you put your mind on something other than the urge, especially something that's interesting and engaging to you, you'll think about the urge less and the urge will get colder, okay? And you could also literally cool down, right? Because it's actually a hot feeling that you get when you have a burning desire for something. So you could use your tip skills, right? And the T in tip stands for tip your temperature by, putting ice on your face or cold water or holding ice, right? And literally cooling down, okay? And it kind of soothes your system and it calms it down so it doesn't feel like you're as revved up about the urge, okay? All right. Another thing we could do is to make the urges cold by making the consequences hot. Okay, so before it was the opposite, right? So we made the urges hot by making the consequences cold. Now we're going to do the reverse. So we're going to try to make the consequences matter more and seem more vivid to us so that they help motivate our behavior, okay? So one thing you could do is to think of what the consequences could be, but imagine them as vividly as you can. Imagine them as if they're happening right now, okay? So let's say I'm thinking about that hamburger again, okay? And I'm thinking, well, if I keep eating hamburgers all the time, it could affect my health in a negative way, okay? So what if I vividly imagine myself at a doctor's office, nervously waiting, and the doctor walks in with his white coat and gives me the bad news that I have heart disease or something to that effect. And now my lifestyle is going to change because of this and that, or I need surgery or stents put in or something. And really imagining the fear of feeling that, or the worry about my health, or what that's going to mean to my family, right? And I'm really putting myself there and feeling those consequences, right? Or even a more immediate consequence. What if, I imagine myself eating too much and eating a big burger and having a horrible stomach ache, and remembering what that feels like and really imagining myself suffering from that, right? When it's vivid enough, it might motivate me more than if it feels like way far away and it may not even happen, okay? And if you want to write it down, if you're writing kind of a person, that's cool, because sometimes that could help you describe it in a more vivid way and keep you in the moment thinking about it. Or if you're an artistic person, you could certainly draw it, okay, or something to that effect. Or even like watch videos of people who have suffered consequences and are telling their stories, right? Especially for addiction, right? That's why they go to 12-step meetings. People share their stories of all the bad stuff they experienced, all the bottoms they experienced. And that inspires people to keep the memory green so that they don't want to pick up again, right? See how that goes? So you're making the consequences hot in 12-step meetings by remembering all the bad stuff that happened to you when you used, right? Okay, so if you look at the bottom of the screen, this is a chart that they had in the book, okay? And it was also on a Google image search, happened to be. So if you look in the top left, right, it says current self and future self. They're two circles that look like this, okay? So when your current self feels completely separate from your future self, you tend not to care about the consequences much because it doesn't feel very relevant to you. It feels like it's almost happening to another person, okay? But if you move across, right, and there's more and more overlap between your current self and your future self, the more overlap there is, the more likely you are to make a wise decision for the long run, right? So when I imagine that future scenario very vividly, and it feels like it's happening now, like I'm experiencing it now, there's much more of that overlap. And the consequences feel that much more significant to me, right? And they're much more likely to motivate me to resist the urge. Okay, see how that goes? Okay, so another thing that you could try is the cope ahead skill. Okay, so in ABC Please in motion regulation for DBT, the C stands for cope ahead. Okay, and what they talk about for urges in particular is an if-then plan. Okay, so if you have a feeling you might be in a triggering situation, don't just be caught by a surprise, right? Try to plan ahead of exactly what you will do if you're triggered by a particular thing. Okay, so here's a different example. I know I used the hamburger thing for most of this, but I'll change it up a little bit. Why not? So let's say, you might be hanging around a person that tends to push your buttons. Okay, maybe it's someone in your family or someone at work or whatever, right? And you're going to see that person later. So if they say certain things, you're going to get angry and you're going to have an urge to tell them off or come back at them in a verbally aggressive way. Okay. So that if it happens and you build it up in your mind, you're going to start thinking, oh, it's going to be so great. And I'm going to say this or that, or I'm going to get revenge and I'm going to tell them off, and you're going to rehearse all these things that you want to say, right? And you're going to build it up in your mind, and the anger is going to get stronger, right? You know what I'm talking about? Okay. So that would be making the urge hot. But what if I'm triggered by this person and I want to keep the urge cold? All right, so I come up with a plan. So what if I imagined, like, okay, so let's say I told this person off. And maybe immediately I'd feel great and be like, oh yeah, I got him, right? But okay, what if, later on I feel kind of guilty about it? Like, oh geez, that's not really in line with my values. I don't really want to be the kind of person that's acting like that. I'm trying to be a kinder person, or I'm trying to be more patient or more respectful. And if I do that, I'm going to be disappointed in myself, right? I could just imagine feeling bad about it and, ashamed about it and beating myself up for losing control. And then what if I mess up the relationship? Even if I don't particularly like the person, maybe I still need to hang out with the person, especially if it's someone in my family or if it's someone at work and I have to see that person every day. Oh man, how much trouble is it going to be to have to backpedal and maybe say I'm sorry or admit I'm wrong, or worry that they're still mad at me or they're ignoring me. Oh man, that's a lot to go through, right? So when I start to make that vivid, it's like, maybe it's going to motivate me to keep my mouth shut or handle it in a more assertive way or a different way. Yeah. Also, I could think of, well, if I end the interaction early, for example, or I walk away before things get too heated, or I tell them, this is too much for me, or let me think about it and I'll get back to you. And I have that as my contingency plan, then I might feel really good about myself, right? If I walk away, wait till I cool off, and then deal with the person later in a healthier, more productive way, I might be like really glad that I kept my control, right? That I stayed in control. I did something that was respectful. I didn't lose control of my impulses, my urges to tell them off. Good for me. Okay. And think about that. Think about how vivid that could feel to remind myself of that. Okay. So see how this works? All right. And the idea is, if you repeatedly practice these if-then plans, it starts to become a new habit. Like, it is hard in the beginning, especially if it's a response that you're not used to making. But, if you're repeatedly finding yourself in these same triggering situations, but you keep making new plans on how to deal with them and following through with them, it becomes like a new routine and it won't be so bad. Okay. All right. So just wanted to share this. So this is the book I was referring to. So it's called The Marshmallow Test, by a psychologist named Walter Mischel, who's been a psychologist for like at least 50 years, like a long time. This guy is pretty famous. And he did a marshmallow test with these kids years ago. And they were told, if you want one marshmallow now, you could have it. But if you wait for me to come back, I'm going to leave the room. If you wait for me to come back, then I'll give you 2 marshmallows. And the kids who had enough self-control to wait for the second one, actually showed later on in their life that they had more self-control in all different areas, right? So the question is, are we going to pass our own marshmallow test, so to speak, right? So and he talks about the hot and cold technique and stuff like that, and how the kids use it with the marshmallow test and how people use it in other areas of their life. Okay, so if you want to check out the book, it's pretty cool. But I, just wanted to share some of the main points with you today. All right, so I hope that helps. Give it a try, all right? It might help you with your own urges and struggles too. All right, well, thanks for listening, and I'll see you soon. Bye, guys.